hyperbole and come together to recognize common challenges and as influential voices in our national community help lead constructive dialogue.
And now we will have an opening statement from Marie Hilliard.
Like Dr. Byock, I am a healthcare provider, and there are some sacrosanct principles for the healthcare provider: autonomy, consent, beneficence, justice, and I think we agree upon those. From the time of Hippocrates, the role of the physician has been separated and distinct from the sorcerer, the person who helped people die. That was affirmed by the Geneva Declaration in 1948 that said the primary function of the physician, the first priority, is the beneficence toward his or her patient. Rationing violates that. It violates consent and autonomy. As the largest provider of non-governmental health care in this country, the Catholic Church, we're intimately aware of the need for health care reform. But this reform must be based in justice, non-discriminatory, not discriminating against the disabled or those who are vulnerable because of their stage of development, early or late in their development. Government clearly has a role in our society in making sure that affordable and quality health care is available to all persons. And we do that in a number of ways. We do that through our licensing laws to prevent negligence, quality assurance standards. We also can do it through mechanisms where we study comparative effectiveness, as long as the results of those studies aren't used discriminatorily, i.e. discriminating against younger women in terms of mammographies. We have to make sure that we don't discriminate, and that's what the Baby Doe Law was all about. The Baby Doe Law, preventing discrimination to newborns born with disabilities, and rationing would violate those laws. If we look at the last 40 years and what has been used in terms of Medicare, in terms of dollars in that last year of life, it has remained stable and consistent with Western Europe, except for the country of Switzerland. That has remained stable. Where we need to focus, it seems, in the age groups between 65 and 85 years of age. We need to do better education, like Robert Wood Johnson sponsors, and I was a co-founder of a coalition in the state where we continue to provide education to providers, medical students, and to consumers, so good dialogue will occur, so autonomous decision-making can be made with the professional, so that consent isn't violated, and that other people aren't determining our quality of life, saying for us what our dignity is, that we allow the physician to be operable in our best interest for our beneficence, not making arbitrary decisions, because with rationing, the physician becomes the gatekeeper. He becomes the agent of the state, he or she, and it does violate that sacred role of those 4 principles I started out with.
Well, I have to say, I find it shocking that Ken, a lawyer friend, believes that humanity is of such a nature that we would be able to fund the future by eliminating fraud. This level of optimism is rare in debate. I believe that the numbers speak for themselves. We have hard choices to make, difficult choices to make, and in the sense that not everyone can get everything they want, I believe that the case is clear. The numbers just don't stack up. We're not going to be able to act as if they do. That said, I hear the worry about government. People did not like it when government said, we're going to intervene in the Terri Schiavo case. People don't like it when government intervenes at the bedside at different levels. They don't want governors and congressmen and bureaucrats telling them what to do. Fair enough. But that isn't the only way to ration. We should be looking, in the spirit of Marie's comments, toward not rationing people, not the disabled, not the weak, not the vulnerable, but procedures. What's marginally effective? What doesn't do very much good at all? And then, if we can start to explain this to people, I believe we will see some forego the marginal, the hyper-expensive, the painful and burdensome. The dying often do not want to be burdened by everything that medicine has to offer, and we may be able to contain resources not so much by bureaucrats telling us what to do, but by people saying, I forego that, I waive it, I don't want to have it, and do not force it upon me.
Look, no one is suggesting that we shouldn't be good stewards of scarce resources in this country. What we're suggesting very simply is that there is nothing that equips government bureaucrats to make quality of life decisions about people who are dying. And the reality of our experience in Washington in the real world, Art, is that there is not a one-for-one exchange when it comes to saving money in a particular area and applying it to be used in a related area. In Washington, when savings are made, there are 535 members of Congress who are eager to pounce on that savings so that they can put it in pursuit of some special project in Peoria, or perhaps award a favored campaign contributor with an earmark or something else of that nature. What we're suggesting to this audience very simply is that end-of-life decision-making ought to be made by the physician at the bedside.
Ira, you're a palliative care doctor. First of all, for the audience, just explain briefly what palliative care is, and then I'll ask you a question.
Palliative care is a team-based approach to care for people who are facing life-limiting illness and their families. And we focus on people's comfort and quality of life, decision-making often in difficult circumstances such as we're talking about now, and follow them through the end of life.
So you've been a doctor at the bedside of many dying patients.
I'm a practicing physician these days.
Do you want the government getting between you and your patient?
Well, I have to say that we physicians don't want to be making these decisions on a case-by-case basis. It's wrenching. You know, doctors love their patients. They want the best care possible for their patients. And it's really impossible to limit in any rational way care for a patient who's demanding or just wanting to live as long as possible, whether that is a heart transplant or a liver transplant or the fourth or fifth line chemotherapies for cancer that we know is incurable. I think the large majority of physicians would say we want this decision to be made on a communal level. Maybe it's not the faceless bureaucrat. I would agree with you on that. And I don't have a lot of faith in Congress myself these days to wrestle with these decisions. But somehow a process that's transparent and that involves people from many walks of life, including clinical clinicians, ethicists, theologians, people who really can represent the broad variety of Americans, need to set communal standards, alleviating the responsibility for physicians to make these decisions. It's much easier to care well for people and to provide them with the best care possible when the limits are being set in a rational way beyond us.
That sounds like a pretty good decision-making team. Marie Hilliard, what would be wrong with that?
No matter what, those decisions would not be taken out of your hands in rationing. Actually, you would become the gatekeeper. You would move from the Hippocratic role to either the entrepreneur business role, where money counts, or the social service role, where decisions are going to be made because you're the one who's going to be determining whether that person's quality of life is minus 25, as is done in Great Britain now. So you're going to be put in a position of, I think, deciding with the government over the patient in terms of what care will be provided.
Tonight, a debate over end-of-life decisions. Should society engage in rationing costly health care when recovery is no longer an option? That was the debate held at the University of Virginia's Miller Center of Public Affairs recently. Arguing for rationing, Ira Byock, a doctor and director of palliative medicine at Dartmouth-Hitchcock Medical Center in Lebanon, New Hampshire, and Arthur Kaplan, director of the Center for Bioethics and a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. Arguing against rationing, Ken Connor, chair of the Center for a Just Society and a lawyer in private practice. He represented former Governor Jeb Bush's defense of Terry's Law, the legislation named for Terry Schiavo. And Marie Hilliard, director of bioethics and public policy at the National Catholic Bioethics Center. She's also a registered nurse. The moderator was Susan Denser, editor-in-chief of Health Affairs and an analyst for the NewsHour.
Some people have said we should dispense with the word rationing and just start to talk about rational care. Do you think we could ever agree as a society on what rational care is? Art.
Well, I would hope so. Let's take a look at what works. Let's understand rationally how to handle decision-making authority if you're not competent. Can we set up an understanding that we don't want meddling in direct bedside care, that the beneficence of the doctor should be the ethic that we want to see, but we don't have much evidence right now about what works and what goes on in healthcare. I would venture to say we don't even know what prices are. We don't know what we're paying for most of the time. Anybody who's looked at a hospital bill has been through an experiment in some kind of astrology. There's no decoding it. No one knows what's going on. So could we get more rational than we are now? That would be very easy to achieve. Would that spare us rationing? I don't know. I don't think so, but I think it would help guide, again, the decisions that we're going to have, the tougher decisions that are looming out there.
Howard, you were perking up.
Well, we're just not rational at all as a society, as a culture. Avoidance of death is pervasive in our society. I don't want to think about it. Really captures the American approach to dying. And denial of death doesn't get easier as people get sicker. Sometimes it gets more entrenched. You know, superstition is alive and well in America today. We don't even want to talk about it as if, oh, don't talk about that, Dad, as if talking about it will make it happen. So we have to get over it. We're mortal. We're going to die. Let's get over it and start talking about how we can make the best use of the resources that we have available to us, including the best medical care possible. But we ought to do that as a moral society with the stakeholders, the governmental stakeholders, the ethicists, the marketplace, the pharmaceutical companies. There's a moral, ethical bottom line that they have to join us in as a society in deciding what makes sense. But we need to do that with the full acknowledgement that we're mortal. And we need to make the best use of our resources for the time that we are given this gift of life.
We cannot do it all, but we have to make sure that good education is done and decisions are made autonomously with families, with physicians who are not made to feel uncomfortable in telling people that this is not going to be in their best interest. We think this treatment, this procedure really is not only not in your best interest, but might even be harmful. It's hard for physicians to do that and healthcare providers to do that, but we have good programs that help physicians to learn those skills to work with families.
You asked the question about rational care. I think that makes a lot of sense. The kinds of questions we ought to be asking, I think, is the procedure within the generally accepted standard of care? Is it necessary for the patient? Is it clinically appropriate? Is the cost reasonable compared to similar services? These are the kinds of questions I think we ought to be asking. But we shouldn't relegate to the faceless bureaucrats the discretion to decide who lives and who dies, who gets treatment and who doesn't, based on things like quality adjusted life years or quality of life calculus or functional capacity studies. Old folks with dementia don't score well using quality of life calculus. People who are disabled don't score well using functional capacity studies. But their dignity is not diminished and their life is not worth any less than any other person. And we shouldn't have some bureaucrat in Washington deciding they don't have a life worth living. End of story, no more care.
If you want to watch the entire debate, please check your local public television station listings.